You're listening to the Awesome Impact B2B Sales Podcast. Each episode, we will share insights, strategies, and mindsets needed to not just meet, but consistently exceed your goals and truly make an awesome impact in your market. Let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Awesome Impact B2B Sales Podcast. And I am here today with a very special guest, a gentleman by the name of Bryan Flanagan. He is a salesperson and sales trainer we decided on using the term many years.
Thank you.
To explain how long he's been in this business. And that's why I'm excited to have him here today, because there's just a wealth of information that Bryan brings to the table. I met Bryan back in 2014 when working with the Zig Ziglar organization, and we've kept in touch from time to time. And he was one of the first people that I needed to have on this podcast interview. So welcome, Bryan. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, what it is you do, and what you've been doing for many years?
I've had a pretty short career. I spent 14 years with the IBM Corporation. I spent 29 years with the Zig Ziglar Corporation, and in the last few years, Flanagan Training Group Corporation. So I have been in the sales business all my life, and I have been in the training business full time for 41 years now. Pretty amazing. It's been good to me.
So you have learned, you've learned a lot. And I've got a few questions, and that, and if we go off on different tangents there, that's fine too, because I want to make sure that I get, the breadth of your experience in sharing that with our audience. So, we talk on this podcast about business to business sales, and what does that look like from, everywhere? Our listeners are everywhere from people just starting in their career, first time for their first job out of school, all the way to veterans that are just looking to kind of polish up their game or look at new technology. We don't talk a tremendous amount, or haven't spoken a lot about specific technology and tools necessarily, but, that's fair game as well. But maybe at some point, we can talk a little bit about that. But I want to start really with a big question. And the big question is, what, in your opinion, is the biggest challenge or biggest mistake salespeople commit?
You mentioned technology earlier. I wanted to comment on that. That's one of the biggest changes in the world of sales. But the other changes don't affect what you do when you're in front of the customer, on the phone, virtually, whatever. I think we lose sight of that. We're beginning to believe that social media is selling, when in fact you can use social media for marketing, because marketing is creating a demand for your product. Selling is the hard part, and it's converting that demand. So what hasn't changed in the time I've been doing that since the beginning of this century and in the last century is that it's still a people business, even though it's a lot of people selling commodity, quote unquote, but it's understanding the conversation that you have with somebody before you make the presentation. And that's still a problem. I think one of the biggest challenges and mistakes people make is that they get ahead of themselves in the sales process, and they're trying to solve something before the customer agrees it's a problem. And I teach a process.
Yeah, and
when you jump over a step or two, you become one of those salespeople that you don't want to become. And that's a pushy salesperson. I asked 3 questions. Here's the solution right here. After 3 questions, they must be dynamite questions. So the biggest challenge a lot of people have is slowing down, asking enough questions to know what to pinpoint when they do offer a solution. And if you don't have a process, that's a big problem.
Right, because then you're just winging it, and you're just going in with assumptions, right? We talked in the past about, I'm going to get this expression wrong, so you're going to have to correct me. But, a prescription without a diagnosis is malpractice. Did I say that right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
But I remember, at Ziglar, talking a lot about that
Yeah.
because, how do I know what you want? How do I know what you need? If you approach, that's what I think I hear you saying, right? If you approach the customer without that curiosity to find out, what's the need, then you're setting yourself up for potentially for failure.
I'm gonna twist ABC. We were taught back in my day, ABC always be closing. What I found now is ABC stands for always be curious.
Mm,
You're only as good as your information. And I learned this from a realtor, his name is Lena. Whoever has the most information has the most influence. It stands to reason, makes perfect sense. I need a process to get that information. I need more than just 2 questions to get information enough to make a specialized, a focused presentation, demonstration, however you sell your product. If you don't have that, then you're selling to everybody like you sold to everybody yesterday, and that's simply not the case.
And I think some people think they could short circuit it by using the internet. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with investigating kind of the company that
Without a
you're
doubt,
going
that
into to
that
speak
that's
to.
good technology when used correctly, yes,
Mhm.
but it doesn't.
But then just, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it just doesn't make the sale. There's some products that do, but business to business sales, especially if it's a high ticket item, you need to have, as I said, conversation before presentation. And
Exactly.
one of the principles I call these principles. You make more money solving problems than you do selling products or services. If we're product focused, we're going to get into a price war with our competitor. If for functionality, they have it, we have it, we have it, they have it, you're going to get a price war. And a lot of people on your podcast may be built this business by themselves. They've expanded it, and everything they built over these years, the salespeople turned it into a commodity. Well, that's not right. It's heart and soul. We solve problems. We help move you to the next level. You reach home safely. All the things that the intangibles that you sell. Sometimes those are more important than the tangibles.
Right. And people are willing or have to be willing really to have that curious spirit and to go in and ask those questions.
Mhm.
I think sometimes the microwave nature of our culture prevents people from doing that, right? Where I got a number, I've got a month to make, I've got name your KBI or whatever. I've got to make this particular number. So I'm, 100 leads in, 50% of them will close. So let's go, and there's no time to be curious there, right? Because you may find that what you have to offer, or at least what you have to offer today, will not solve their problem. And then, I guess, in my opinion, the best thing to do there is just be honest and say, listen, sorry, Brian, I thought I could help you, but looking at this, let me suggest some other things, or even some other colleagues, in adjacent businesses that could solve the problem that you're looking to solve. And I think you
You
get incredible credibility there.
in our conversation earlier, John, you were talking about younger people moving into Salesforce, moving into the sales realm. And I wrote a book called So You're New to Sales. And the mistakes we have a tendency to make as new salespeople, we get trained on the product. We go out and make calls. We go to site visits, depending, again, what you sell. We understand that we have to regulated industries, whether it be stocks, bonds, whatever. We understand all the things and all the ramifications the product does. That's how we get trained. So the first time we encounter a customer, we want to talk about what we know, which is our product. But that product doesn't change from day to day. Your product, your offering doesn't change. It's the same thing. What changes every call is what the customer wants. And you've got to fit that into your laundry list of products, offerings, functionalities, etc. And too often we throw the same pitch to every batter, and a lot more than half go away. You don't close a lot of sales that way. If we tailor it by understanding what they need, selling becomes a lot more fun.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's a conversation too, and it's something that we do with another person, not to another person, right? That's a
Yeah.
classic tone, but it's very true. I came from a science background, right? So my degrees are in chemistry and science, and it was always about the data, the data, the data, right? But very quickly, what you find is that people buy from people. They don't, I mean, certain products, we all look at stats and we'll purchase based upon that. But bigger ticket items, things that really make a difference for an organization, like we sell research products. So those research products help people do research. So these are big ticket purchases. Guess what? They buy them based upon how that solves their problem, and not on this what we call speeds and feeds, right? Because in today's world, a lot of people, if you're a world-class company, you're making a world-class product, and you've got quality down, you've got all those things down. So now what about the relationship and the way in which I'm going to be treated as a customer when I make this investment with you, and how is that going to make me feel? And that's kind of what we've experienced, over the years. Sometimes it's hard to get technical people to sell, because selling is such a behavioral thing. And I did a podcast on sales being a noble profession, right? When you could take away from it that it's just two humans or a group of humans having an interaction and being human, then it becomes a whole different game and a whole different
Truly.
profession. And it does become fun, right?
This
Yeah.
morning I was
Yeah.
working with the
And I'm gonna
bank.
I'm gonna go off camera. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I was working with the bank this morning, and a lot of the people in there don't want to be salespeople. And I respect that. We've got a visitor behind us there. And what I
Yeah, that's
told
all
them is,
right. Hey.
the more the merrier. And I hope you brought the dog, because our dog is a barker. I told them, some of you
No,
don't
that's
want to be
okay.
professional salespeople, and some of them didn't want to be professional salespeople. But everybody has got to be a professional who can sell. And I use a lot of Zig's quote because he had an impact on both our lives. We understand that. Zig said, your sales
Mm.
team is not your entire organization, yet your entire organization is your sales team, because there's not one person who can't cost you a sale. Putting the
True.
wrong package on the wrong label with the wrong address, whatever. Everybody's in sales. Just the successful ones admit it. Everybody's in sales. It's not on their business card necessarily, but everybody contributes to the growth of the company. And that's a great mindset.
Exactly. And that takes time, right? That's a whole culture thing, right? We can do a whole podcast on company culture, corporate culture, and what's permitted, and, what's fed grows, right? And what isn't watered doesn't grow and dies, right? So there's a lot. You mentioned success, right? Only the successful ones admit that they're in sales. So, but what are the elements to sales? And while you're starting the answer to that question, I'm going to go off a camera for about 2 seconds, and you'll
Sure,
understand
sure.
why I went off camera. But go ahead.
If I were giving advice to somebody that just started, or somebody that's been in the trenches for a long time, a veteran, the first thing the first process I talk about, the hard skills, if you will, find a process that works for you. I've learned the hard way that selling is a
Mm.
process, it's not a personality. When I was in college, my buddies would say, Flanagan, why are you in the College of Education? I thought I wanted to be a high school basketball coach. Why are you in the College of Education? You ought to be in the College of Business. And I'd say, well, why do you say that? Because you ought to go into sales. Scared me to death. I knew nothing about it. And I asked the people this morning at the bank, at one point in time, you didn't want to be a salesperson. Why not? What were the negative indicators? They're slimy, they're intrusive, they're manipulative, they're pushy. Well, why'd you go to the dark side? Why'd you come over here? You got new information. And the key there is people make new decisions only when given new information. When I found out that selling wasn't hype and deception, when selling wasn't telling, my career took off. And I tell people what I learned then was, just because you have the ability to carry a tune does not mean you have the ability to sing. And just because you had the ability to talk does not mean you had the ability to sell. So one of the first things, the element that I think is the most crucial, find a process that's client-based and can work and be repeatable. And a lot of people say, well, just start
Right.
talking. We ask you a couple of questions. Well, what happens when the sale's not made? How do you go back and see where did it fail? Where did it break down? If you don't have a process, you can't do that. You can't go back and dissect the call and dissect the relationship because you don't have a process.
Yeah, you
And
said
I believe,
something there.
yeah, earlier you said something about communication. In its simplest form, selling is nothing more than a communication process, and we complicate it.
Yeah, no, well said. I know we do a lot of work kind of dissecting, well, the customers today are on this buyer's journey, and by the time they get to you, they're at a different point than they were years ago, and that's fine. At the end of the day, in B2B sales, at least my experience shows if you're purchasing anything of significant value, not only monetary value, but use for your organization,
Sure.
it comes down to talking with a salesperson and asking those questions that you can't answer by doing your research or putting it into a chatbot and
That's
getting
right.
an answer
That's
back.
right.
So that communication is super helpful, but it's also I like what you said. You know what a process does in my mind is says, well, you could be a successful salesperson because you can follow a process. It's not going to guarantee
That's
100%
right.
closure every time, but at least you're going to know what parts of that process you need to fine tune in your industry, even with yourself, right? I might be great at, doing demos, but quite honestly, demos maybe are not really where the customer needs to be. Maybe they don't need to see the product that way. Maybe they need to hear
Well,
more about the company or the service or, you name your
w- yeah, I'm working with a
advantage.
large, an international manufacturer of farm equipment, mowers, tractors, all attachments. These salespeople have worked the farm. They've driven these things. But what they do when they
Mm,
become a salesperson and go to the dealership, when somebody walks in, they ask two questions. How much acreage do you have? What are you trying to do? Let's go look at the zero turn. Well, wait a minute. That's not enough
right.
information. That's not enough questions. But when you said they give demos, oftentimes they're giving product demos. They're not giving selling demos. They can make this demonstration
Mm.
to anybody, but that's not what the person wants. He wants it specifically. Here's how I'm going to use it. I'm going to be on it I got a lot of land. I'm going to be on it for an hour before the grandkids come and we're going to go water skiing. I don't want to be tired. I want to have some energy for the grandkids. But yet we're asking them, well, how much acre, how much you want to spend, as opposed to what do you do with the property? How
What's
long
your
do you have it?
budget?
Yeah. 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 Press hard,
Yeah.
3 copies, third copy's yours. It's amazing. And John, this is one of the things that I'm so glad I learned. It's a great quote. I'm sure I stole it from somebody. If you steal from me, you're stealing twice. Selling is a process, not a personality. And here it comes. The sales process takes pressure off the salesperson.
Mm.
Let the process absorb the pressure. The sales process takes pressure off the sales prospect. John, I'd like to show
Yeah.
you what we got here, but before we do, I'd like to enter into a little bit of a contract with you. I'm going to ask you some questions. You're going to answer. At any time you feel that it's not a fit, let's tell each other. And that's what I would like to do. What would you like to do? And if he says that's fine with me, now I've framed the call, and he knows that he's going to have to spend some time answering some questions. Quote unquote, I set him up for that. And I may say something like this. Now, John, if you feel any pressure whatsoever, let's understand that let's you and I put that pressure on the process we just talked about. That way, both of us will have the freedom to be straight up with one another. I don't want the customer to have tension. I don't want them to be hesitant. Let the process absorb the pressure.
Now, what happens, and I know you've experienced this, and a lot of salespeople I've spoken to have experienced this. Um, when you when it is a pleasurable sales experience, when you're being sold to, when you or I are being sold to, and it's a pleasurable sales experience, it's amazing, right? It really feels like something truly was accomplished. And and a lot of times we buy emotionally. I mean, there's a lot of research that says
Exactly.
we buy based upon emotions. A lot of times we'll pay more. We will certain things that were once maybe important are no longer as important for us. Again, if we're having a good experience with our sales partner on the other end of the phone screen or in person, that's been my experience. I'll be like, well, I want you to replace my roof because I have a funny story about pizzerias that just takes too long to explain, but I live in a part of the country where there's a pizzeria on literally every corner. And we have our choice of like six of them within a mile of us. And there's one that we go to consistently, and it's for very specific reasons. But the point is, even something like pizza, the experience you have in the establishment being sold to makes the difference, right?
Yeah, and
So, and that can
that relationship cures a lot of ills. If I foul a customer that I've had a relationship with, that I've delivered on my promises, if I fumble the ball, he'll pick up and give it back to me. Let's do it again. But if I don't have that relationship, one fumble, one and done. You fouled me once, you're not going to foul me anymore. But the other thing I've discovered with having a relationship that's based on all the trust factors that, as you know, Zig talks about, is that it often allows us to order more in less time. Rather than postponing this order till the next quarter, let's go ahead and put it on order now and get ready for it. There's a 2-week ship delay, whatever. That's also what I found remarkable is that the people that really know that get the most out of their accounts.
right, because it's trust, right?
Yeah.
So people, there's a reciprocal nature even in sales too, right? So I've treated you well, I've over delivered in many cases.
Mhm.
Let's hope, and now I want to do something for you, the salesperson. That there's what can I do? I mean, I had a mentor tell me early on. But again, I came from a science background, so the whole idea of closing, uh, you know, to me in the beginning was, oh, that's just pressure. That's just putting pressure on people. And this mentor said to me and said, okay, they know you're a salesperson. Like if you don't, like you're not being who you are or you're supposed to be. I mean, it's not like, I mean, you have to now there's a way to close, right? There's a way to ask
Sure.
for the order and there's timing and there's part of the process, but they expect that from you, right? I mean, like it's you've taken me to this point.
And
Okay,
the but the other side of that is this. If you're calling on a corporation that has salespeople within the company and you make a solid sales call and they could see, oh, I wish my guys could do that. Because you're doing it the right way. You do have a step-by-step process. It's comfortable for the other person, for the prospect, and they're hoping their guys do that. That's what I found. They respect that.
Mm.
I notice how you did this. When I said this, you did that. And they know that that's the way to sell. It's not pressure, it's helping. Helpful intent is the way to sell, not force fitting. Now, with that in mind, I just went off on a tangent. I'm sorry. I learned this
No,
from a
it's quite all right.
customer of mine in New Jersey. This is probably 20 years ago. This statement is dynamite. Here it comes. The intent behind your technique determines your ethics. The intent behind your technique determines your ethics. In your heart of hearts, if you know when this product was invented, when we released this product, it was a special just for you, for your circumstances. If you believe that and you're an integrity-based salesperson, any technique you use is honorable. If you ask a question, I'm not real sure, but if I'm force fitting the sale, stop because you're now violating that ethics because the intent is to sell them something, not to solve their problem. And until you know this will solve their problem, you got to ask more questions. But that was the intent behind your technique determines your ethics determines your professionalism. I grab hold of that. I remember that
Hmm.
a lot. And I
Yeah,
have my
ethics and
sales
integrity,
classes.
right?
Yeah, my sales classes, they say, well, I would never use that technique. Why? I wouldn't want it used on me. Well, you're not selling to you. We have a guy in town you may have heard of, Jerry Jones, who done pretty well in the business world, not so well in the football world. But he knows you're a salesman, much like you said earlier. He can't embarrass him by asking him a hard question. He's a businessman, very successful businessman. He doesn't mind that technique. You got to have some of a relationship to ask some of those questions, but he understands what you're trying to do. You're not selling to yourself. You're selling to somebody else.
Yeah. So I went off camera a little while ago just because I got to get this in frame here.
Oh, there it is.
This is the
You're
book
the one that
you're
bought it.
talking
There it
about.
is.
You sold more than one. I got a couple of tabs in here, and it's all. I tend to mark my books up. I like to take them and mark them up, and I do like physical books too. So that this is it's right here in the bookcase.
My pleasure reading, I can read on in a e-format, but self-help and improvement books, I need to underline, take notes. Same with the
Right.
Bible. I read it every time I read this passage. I didn't get that. I didn't understand it the first time. That's not what I got the first time, because you're different places in your spiritual walk. The
Yep.
same thing and with sales. You read it again. I'm in a different place now. I see a different twist to that.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. Sometimes I actually put the handwritten notes on. I think I have it in another folder, but when I first read it was probably back in 2014. I just thumbing through here right in the beginning, I highlighted personal growth precedes professional growth. Better people build better salespeople. Right? Wow, we could do a podcast just on that. Become a better person
But
so
it
that
is
you
the
can
people side.
sell better.
Zig,
Right?
Zig said the salesperson is the heart of the sales career. And your
Hmm.
integrity, your values, your attributes, that's what carry you. You need a process to do that, granted. But he also
Right.
says you can't make a good deal with a bad guy. So your integrity needs
Hmm.
to come through, Mr. Prospect. I said that. That's not exactly what I meant. Let me explain. Mr. Prospect, we dropped the ball on this, and you've got to step up and address disadvantages early, and you've got to communicate in a way that the person wants to be communicated unto.
So you said something before about, sometimes when there's a problem, that's sometimes an opportunity. I'm paraphrasing, right? So, if you do drop the ball, let's you're in your relationship selling to someone over a few years, and then you just mess up, right? Product doesn't ship,
Guilty.
ship's broken. Yeah, right. Guilty, right? We've all had that happen to us, as we're the seller, and we didn't quite keep the promise that we thought we could keep, even though, we went in with the intention that we would keep it. Sometimes those are the best, those become opportunities to create even a stronger relationship. I mean, I've seen that. Like, it's almost like, hey, Bryan, we've been through the fire. And, you saw me, running around, getting whatever resources, doing whatever I had to do to solve the problem that I created, owning it. We've been through this fire together. And I've seen that strengthens business relationships a great
I
deal.
agree. The easy ones cost you the most time and effort because they turn into you did this for me, so I expect it every time. But the ones you've had to battle,
Mm.
that you went, like you said, you went through the fire together, that forges a relationship that pretty strong. And when somebody, we call them lay down sales or bluebirds at IBM back in the day.
Bluebirds.
When the
Yep.
bluebirds
Bluebirds.
come
Yep.
in, they're too easy, something's wrong. Yeah, too easy
Mhm.
means I'm missing something.
Yeah, there's something that's gonna go wrong, in the end. So, hey, we're just at 30 minutes here, but what I'm thinking is that we should split this conversation up into 2 podcast episodes, not 1, but 2, to give our audience, the full depth and value. So, if you will stay on for a little bit here, what we'll
Sure.
do is we'll just take a brief pause, and we'll start back up again in a moment, and we will do a part 2 of this. I've got a few more questions. Well, I've got enough questions that'll probably take us into the weekend, but I'll make sure I don't ask them all. But thanks for joining us today on this episode. And we're going to have part 2 out as well. So just hang tight.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you'd like more information about how I can help you and your business have an awesome impact with their selling teams, head on over to awesomeimpact.com. There you can connect with me and we can talk. If you have other suggestions about guests I can interview, let me know. We'll talk soon.